In previous videos, I've talked about the fact that I was born in Janesville, Wisconsin, and my family moved to Wichita, Kansas in 1995, and I was there until 2007 when I moved to New York City at 18 years old to attend college. In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about my history and my family's history with New York City prior to me making that decision, and then ultimately how I felt when I actually moved to New York City after having lived exclusively in the Midwest. My first taste of New York City was on a school trip with my yearbook staff to go to a journalism convention at Columbia University my junior year of high school, and I loved it. Nothing about the city intimidated me. I loved how dynamic it was. I had never been to a city that big before. The biggest city I had been to prior to that was Chicago. And so this just blew it out of the water in terms of sheer magnitude and amount of people who were there. Unlike my classmates, I wasn't remotely overwhelmed by the city. I loved it, actually. I loved how dynamic it was. I loved how much was going on at every moment. I loved how tall the buildings were. I loved the subway and how efficient it was. Everything just really appealed to me. So when I started researching about what colleges I wanted to go to after graduating from high school, I naturally gravitated towards options that were in New York. And because I wanted to study film and television, there were only two programs in the country that were really appealing to me. It was NYU or it was USC, the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. I had been to LA before and I didn't really have a great opinion of it at that time. And then also I had heard that USC was more focused on the studio system and writing for television, which didn't appeal to me as much as what NYU offered, which is more focused on cultivating the artistic sensibility. And there were so many writers and directors who had gone there. So that really appealed to me much more because I wanted to be an auteur. I wanted to be a writer director because I was 18 years old and I had no understanding of what a career would actually be like in film and television. Once I made up my mind, NYU became my number one choice and I did not want to go anywhere else. That is how my brain works. And so I decided to apply with early decision, which means that if I were to be granted admittance, which I would find out earlier than most people, then I would have to go there. And I also couldn't apply to any other colleges if I decided to apply to NYU with early decision until after I got rejected. In hindsight, it was really ballsy of me as this Midwestern kid who had no background in film and television and had no awareness of what that type of career would be like, nor did anyone in my family, nor did we have any connections to anyone on the coast to make that decision and be so confident in it. But that is just who I was at the time, and I'm very much that way still to this day. My parents were totally supportive of me pursuing my aspirations, even though it was so far removed from their norms. You know, my dad was a dentist, my mom worked at the family dental practice. No one in our family was really an artist in that way or had pursued an artistic career. But my dad loved film. He loved New York City, whereas my mom, by comparison, had never been to New York City and was pretty apathetic about film. But they both loved me a lot and felt really strongly about what I could achieve. And so they put their support behind me, which is what was the final necessary step to make me apply for early decision and know that if I was granted admittance, that they would have to pony up and send me off to this very expensive private college. So that's what I did. I applied, I made my admissions video, and then I just had to wait until mid-December of 2006. In the meantime, NYU was hosting a prospective student orientation in the fall, and even though I had already applied, I thought it was a good opportunity to go and maybe network a little bit with the admissions staff. Once again, it was my small town mindset, not really understanding how a huge juggernaut of a school works. And then also because my dad had already been to New York City before, he thought it would be a good idea for my mom to go since it would be her first time. It would make her more comfortable with sending her baby boy off to the big city where she thought it was very crime ridden and very scary for some reason. And then also my sister, who had never been to New York City either, decided to join us as well. In the first moment I included for September 9th in my book, Losing Lena May, Cancer Caregiving Memoir, I'm in Washington Square Park, which for those of you who are not familiar with NYU is kind of the central hub of the campus. And I start to walk through the arch and go up Fifth Avenue. And I talk about how I'm retracing the steps that my mom, my sister, and I took after that prospective student orientation. And we decided to head in that direction because both my sister and my mom love shopping. And we knew that Fifth Avenue was the spot for shopping in New York City, at least to our tourist minds. You have to remember this is 2006 though, so we did not have a smartphone with map functionality to be able to determine how to get where we want to go and how far things were from each other. All I had was a Not for Tourists guide, a physical book that I had to reference with a map and try to plot out our next steps. And so we didn't understand how incredibly far we were away from the shopping, and we just strode forward with ignorant bliss and just kept walking and walking and walking. And we went to some really shitty shops thinking that they were the good things that we were supposed to be finding. We just were clueless. It was actually a great time, but very, very silly in retrospect. My sister and my mom also got to see their very first Broadway show, which I had hand selected because I had seen it previously, and it was my favorite show at the time, and it's still to this day my favorite show, and that is Avenue Q, which is a grown-up, profane version of Sesame Street with hit songs like What Do You Do with a BA in English, The Internet is for Porn, and Everyone is a Little Bit Racist. Overall, the trip was fantastic and made me even more excited about going to NYU and living in New York City. And I think it really put my mom at ease about me moving there, at least made her a lot more comfortable about the idea. I'm sure she was still hoping that I would not get in so I didn't have to go there and be so far away from her and living in such a big city, but at least she didn't see any crime or experience anything bad happening there, and she could see that it was an inhabitable city, not like this looming, scary unknown, having just been in the Midwest her entire life. So it was overall a very positive experience. But the downside was that it really ramped up my anxiety about not getting in, because I was so committed to the idea of going to New York University and moving to New York City and finding that liberation there, because ultimately I was in the closet at the time and I knew that I was gay, and I knew that I would find this oasis and safe haven by moving to New York City. So it wasn't just the college and it wasn't just the program that I was going into, it was a whole new life that I could start. And so everything was riding on whether or not the people at NYU would see the promise within me, even though I didn't have the greatest pedigree and I didn't have the best ACT score or SAT score. And as I was sharing with my parents all my anxieties and paranoia about not getting in and them not seeing that I had talent, or the fact that I had misspelled starring in my admissions film, I was like, that's the deciding factor. They're gonna see that it's in the very beginning of the film and I'm gonna be immediately rejected. And so, to my parents' credit, they were really supportive. They were always trying to reassure me that I was a really strong candidate. And I'll never forget that my dad said to me, "Logan, if they don't accept you, who would they accept?" Basically saying that I was the ideal candidate. And even though that really made me feel better in the moment, it didn't stop me from spiraling constantly about whether or not I would get in. For the first 2 weeks of December, I was driving home every lunch break that I had from school to check the mailbox in hopes that I would get something sooner rather than the deadline of December 15th. No, it did come, but on that last day. And when I opened that mailbox, I saw that big envelope and I knew that I had gotten in. I sprinted into the house, ripped it open, saw that I was granted admittance, and I immediately called my mom to let her know. And I was so ecstatic and relieved and overjoyed that I was going to be taking this momentous step forward and that my dreams were finally coming true. And she was so happy for me and proud of me, even though I know that she was scared out of her mind that I was going to be going to New York City. And from that point forward, until I boarded the plane in August of 2007, I could only think about the future that was awaiting me. I just wanted to be in New York City, and I wanted to be going to college with like-minded people. And I was adding a lot of those like-minded people proactively on Facebook, which was still very new at that time. But because we got our NYU emails, we could all be connected. So I was already seeing people. I was already talking to people. They all seemed so cool. They were all from all over the country. I could not be more excited. I had no fear. I had no concern. I knew this was my path forward, and it was the best thing that could have ever possibly happened to me. And there was no questioning that in my mind. And New York City and NYU exceeded all of my already high expectations. It was a perfect fit for me. I felt more at home there than I ever did growing up in the Midwest for 18 years. It just felt like where I had always belonged. The best way that I found to describe the shift between Wichita, Kansas and New York City for me was that in New York, you have access to everything you can fathom. If you want to go to a world-class show, you can go to Broadway. If you want to go to a world-class museum, you can go to MoMA. If you want to go to a world-class meal, you can go to whatever the best restaurant in New York City is at that time, which is ever shifting. Or you can do none of those things. You can be a hermit at home, but those all exist. You could always just jump on the subway and go do something if you want. Whereas growing up in Kansas, there were so few things that you could do. There were so few options. So when you're sitting at home, you don't feel like you can ever stretch your wings. You don't feel like you can ever escape and do something you want. You are always so confined. And of course, I didn't realize that at the time of being in the Midwest, but when I reflected upon it after having moved to New York City, it just became so clear how claustrophobic I felt the entire time. I didn't feel like I could be myself, and I didn't feel like I could ever pursue anything because there wasn't really much for me to pursue in general. I was actually just in New York City, and I stayed with my friend James, who's featured in the moment I included for September 8th in my book. And he, at that point in 2015, when the events of the book were unfolding, had just moved to New York City after having lived in Philadelphia for quite a while. And it was a major step for him. It took a lot of time and effort in working his way up within Ernst & Young to be able to afford moving to the city. And I was so proud that he had taken the leap, because when we dated, he wanted to move to New York City so badly, but he was also just so locked into the culture of Philadelphia, and it just felt like almost an impossibility to him. 10 years later, it is very much his home. He's so entrenched there. He has built a life there. He has amazing friends. He has an amazing partner. He has an amazing job at Spotify. And he is just living his best life in New York City in a way that he never could have when he lived in Philadelphia. No offense to Philadelphia, it's a great city, but it is not New York City. This trip, like every trip now that I take to New York City, just remind me that it is my home. LA, where I live now, is not my home. Wichita, Kansas, Janesville, Wisconsin, where I lived before, are not my home. I spent more time in New York City, 12 years, than I did anywhere else in my life. And not only that, those were the most pivotal years of my life because I was really becoming the person I am today. Whenever I'm there, I am just inundated with memories as I'm going through random streets from all these experiences that I had. And it was most of the time experiences prior to my mom having cancer, prior to me being her primary caregiver, prior to her passing away, prior to me having cancer. It was the blissful years of my life where I could not see the darkness on the horizon. I was fully in the sunlight and basking in it because I just felt so optimistic about the future and what I could achieve and what was waiting for me. Nearly 2 decades ago, my dream was to move to New York City for college, and that came true. My dream now is to move back to New York City because I want to be surrounded by those memories again, and I want to be in the city that I fell in love with in high school that is so dynamic and so rich in culture and entertainment and diversity. But I would only move back there if I could live there comfortably, which requires so much money. So click that link to my book in the description and go buy a copy because maybe you'll help me get back to the place that I call home. The next video I'll be releasing will be on September 10th, and I'll be talking about the apartment that I lived in for the full 12 years of my time in New York City. So hit subscribe, leave any questions in the comments, and I will see you then.